Section 47 of Captain Bill McDonald, Texas Ranger, A Story of Frontier Reform. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Captain Bill McDonald, Texas Ranger, A Story of Frontier Reform by Albert Bigelow Paine. Appendix D. Report of an investigation made by Herbert J. Brown, employed by the War Department in conjunction with Captain W. G. Baldwin, with a view of learning what happened at Brownsville, Texas, on the 13th and 14th of August, 1906. Sir, I have the honor to submit the following report relative to the investigation of the Brownsville Raid. Ex-Private Boyd Conyers of Company B, 25th Infantry, now at Monroe, Georgia, told William Lawson, a detective in the employ of Captain William G. Baldwin of Roanoke, Virginia, that he and 3 or 4 other men of the 25th Infantry were leaders in the Brownsville Raid. This information was obtained at different dates during the month of June, 1908. See Exhibit A. I submit the affidavit as presented. There are certain discrepancies of a minor character due to the fact that Lawson is illiterate and had to depend on his memory for details. But it should be borne in mind that Lawson was unacquainted with the details of the Brownsville Raid and was given information which could have come only from one familiar with the secret history of the affair. Lawson's first report included the names of Conyers, John Holloman, John Brown, and, quote, another man, unquote. Subsequently, he supplied the name of James Powell, but I think the original name given was that of Robert L. Collier, Company C, one of the Relief Guard. This information was corroborated in the presence of witnesses, but before Lawson could finish his work, Conyers became suspicious and would give no other evidence incriminating himself. From then on, he furnished to A. H. Baldwin, Captain W. G. Baldwin, and to myself information piecemeal and reluctantly. The name of Carolina de Saussure, his bunkmate, was the last one obtained. Conyers tried to commit suicide after he found out they had made his statements to a detective, declaring that the other Negroes would kill him when it got out. He finally wrote to Senator Foraker and received a reply, a copy of which is annexed. That reply he construed to mean that he should stick to his original story told before the Senate Committee at all hazards, and there he stands. I have every reason to believe that his confession is genuine and gives for the first time the true secret history of the Brownsville Raid. The list of participants given in this report Conyers furnished me personally. I believe it is substantially correct, but with the influence shown to be backing Conyers to adhere to his false testimony given before the Senate Committee still being exerted, he cannot be relied upon to support his own confession until it is thoroughly sustained from other sources. Evidences of similar encouragement to stick to the lies told at Brownsville and before the Senate Committee were found in many places, and subsequent to the date of the Foraker letter, they became stronger and more obstructive than ever. The investigation has been conducted with strict recognition of the advisability of preserving secrecy and with discretion. No promises of immunity were made. The knowledge on the part of the ex-soldiers that the government could not punish them after their separation from the service, coupled with the belief that by preserving silence they would aid in the passage of the relief legislation now pending in Congress, has added to the difficulty of securing information. The issue has evidently become racial. The colored detectives would be confronted frequently in the smaller towns where these men are living with a demand from colored men for information as to their business. We have located over 130 of these ex-soldiers and have been in 30 states in quest of information. The appendices give statements as to the results obtained. They indicate a general knowledge on the part of ex-soldiers that the raid came from inside the fort, and that the soldiers of Company B were the guilty parties. We earnestly urge that we be permitted to continue the investigation. Several detectives are still in the field, and within the coming week, a number of affidavits will be forthcoming. With some repetition of matter appearing later in the report, Boyd Conyers' story is given here in narrative form. Report of T. B. Skidmore. Quote, the rumors of trouble over the assignment of colored troops to Brownsville were circulated before the troops left Fort Niobrara, and preparations were made among the men to, quote, get even with the crackers, unquote, so the whites were called. Some cartridges were held out at the range practice, but more en route to Brownsville. Pretense was made that they were given away at stations along the road. Some were, but a large number were secreted. At the inspection in Brownsville, Lieutenant Laresson, Company B, threatened punishment to the men who were short on ammunition, but nothing was done about it, and the deficiency was supplied. The friction with citizens of Brownsville began at once. In Boyd Conyers' language, "Whiskey made all the trouble. If we hadn't been drinking, we wouldn't have had the nerve to shoot up the town." It was agreed, at a gathering of a few men in the saloon in Allison, the colored ex-soldier, on the morning of August 13th, 1906, that the raid should take place that night at 12 o'clock. It seems to have been delayed a few minutes to let Tamayo, the Mexican scavenger, get away from the B barracks. John Hardeman, the moneylender of Company B, was the chief conspirator and leader in the raid and custodian and distributor of the cartridges, but his plans could not have been carried out had not Sergeant George Jackson of Company B, in charge of the keys of the gun racks in B barracks, and Sergeant Reed, in command of the guards, cooperated both before and after the raid. The 4 men who had led the raid were John Hardeman, John Brown, Boyd Conyers, and Carolina de Saussure, all of Company B, and probably R. L. Collier of Company C. Hardeman was in the barracks, Brown in the bake shop, Conyers and de Saussure in the guardhouse. The 2 latter were in the same detail, and had been relieved at about 11 o'clock, de Saussure on the post at the guardhouse, and Conyers on number 2, around the barracks and facing the town. Hardeman got the party together. Conyers and de Saussure slept on the same bunk in the guardhouse, claiming that they wanted to get under the mosquito net, and they had the trick of taking their guns in the bunk instead of placing them in the open rack, on the excuse that they didn't rust so badly under cover. But really, so the absence of the guns from the open guardhouse rack would not attract attention, and their own absence would be ascribed to a visit to the closet, which was back of the guardhouse. These 2 men slipped out of the rear door of the guardhouse, passed through the sallyport, and joined Hardeman and Brown. The party crossed the wall of the fort down near the end of A barracks, went up the roadway to the entrance to the Cohen alley, where the signal shots were fired. These shots were immediately tallied onto by the alarm shots of Joseph B. Howard, guard on number 2, and formed the series testified to by Mrs. Katie E. Leahy of Brownsville. Her testimony is further borne out by the statement that not over 30 seconds elapsed before a number of men of Company B swarmed out on the upper gallery and opened the fusillade on the town. It is an absolute certainty that it would have been impossible for Sergeant Jackson to have opened the gun racks, for the men to have assembled, secured their guns, loaded them, gone out to the gallery, and started firing, all after the first shot was fired, all aroused, as they testified unanimously, from sound slumber in less than 2 minutes, in the confusion of a dark barrack room. Beyond the possibility of a doubt, the racks had been opened and the inside conspirators were ready to pour out on the signal shots. The testimony is ample that there were scarcely 20 seconds between the last of the signal shots and the first general volley from B barracks. The number firing from the barracks is unknown, but perhaps 20 men were involved. A smaller number went to the ground and followed the leaders up the alley. It will be remembered that one of the witnesses testified to hearing some one of the group of soldiers exclaim, "There they go," whereupon these men leaped over the wall and ran up the alley. Boyd Conyers is the man whose gun jammed at the exit of the alley by the Cohen house, testified to by Herbert Elkins, and it was taken from him by de Saussure and fixed in the street where the light from the street lamp at the corner of Elizabeth Street shone on them. Less than 5 minutes elapsed from the time the first shot was fired until these men were all back inside the fort. Conyers stated that Reed was told that they were going to shoot up the town, and he laughed and said, "Don't go out there and let the crackers get the best of you." When Conyers and de Saussure reached the guardhouse, they ran in the back way and got into their bunks. Sergeant Reed came in and swore at them, but Conyers was so excited and out of breath that he could hardly stand, so Reed stationed him at the rear of the guardhouse in the dark, where he could not be scrutinized so closely. Hardeman came around with extra cartridges about daybreak, and Reed passed them out. The guns were all cleaned before daylight. End quote. This day personally appeared before me, William Lawson, who, being duly sworn, deposes and says, quote, "On June 5th, 1908, I was sent to Monroe, Georgia, to interview Boyd Conyers, one of the soldiers who was stationed at Brownsville, Texas, in August 1906. I was sent by Mr. Baldwin to get in with Conyers and ascertain if he knew who did the shooting at that point. I was not given the names of any of the members of either of the companies stationed at the point, nor was I given any other information, except the fact that a shooting occurred at the time and place above mentioned." and that Boyd Conyers was suspected of knowing who did same. I arrived at Monroe, Georgia on June 5th and stopped at the home of Esther Cruz, colored. I met Boyd Conyers, who is known as Buddy Conyers, on the morning of June 6th, but had very little conversation with him, but was introduced to him as an old soldier. On the morning of June 8th, between 8 and 9 o'clock, I met Conyers about halfway between the station house and Main Street. We talked some 20 or 25 minutes. I broached the Brownsville case and mentioned the fact that the soldiers had shown their good sense by keeping their mouths while at Washington. I then asked him what the motive was for the shooting. He told me that the crackers at Brownsville had made threats that they would have no Negro soldiers at Brownsville, and that the soldiers had made it up in their minds that if they bothered them, that they would go in and clean up the ground. He also said that they mentioned this to Sergeant Reed, who was the commander of the guards, and that Reed said, "All that I have to say is to take care of yourselves and the boys when you go down there." S.H. Parker, whose home is in Charleston, South Carolina, was present and heard the same conversation. About then, a gentleman called Conyers came to clean some clothes, and Conyers left, and nothing further was said about the matter at the time. I was with Conyers nearly every day, and went to Gainesville, Georgia, on an excursion with him on the 15th of June. I did not mention the Brownsville matter to Conyers again until the 29th of June, when I returned from Atlanta, having gone there on June 27th. On this date I met him at Joe Blassingame's and had a pint bottle of liquor, offered him a drink. He would not drink in the house, but we went up the street and we stopped under a storehouse porch near Main Street. We took a drink or two, and I started the Brownsville case again. He told me that he was doing guard duty at the time of the shooting at Brownsville, and was stationed at the outlet towards the town. He said that when the guard was called the night of the shooting, they mentioned to Sergeant Reed what had occurred downtown, and he said, "Boys, if you are not satisfied, you'll have to go and get satisfied," and they remarked that they were going to get satisfaction that night. Reed then laughed and said, "Boys, don't you go down there and let them get the best of you." He then assigned the guard and went away. In this conversation, Conyers told me that John Brown, J.H. Hardeman, and a man named Powell, and several others, came down where he was on guard, and that they went downtown and just gave them hell, and after they shot out all their cartridges, they ran back to the barracks, and when they got back to the barracks, they found that the alarm had been sounded, and the officers were calling the roll. Hardeman, Brown, and themselves were late for roll call, but that someone answered for Brown and Hardeman, but that he was late, and that Reed had told him they had gotten themselves and himself in a hell of a hole, and told him to go to the guardhouse and pretend to be asleep, which he did. He told me they had slipped a few cartridges when at target practice, and that before inspection, after the shooting, Reed gave him some cartridges to replace the ones he had used. He further said that they had agreed before they went out that they would keep their mouths, and that he would have told them at the investigation at Washington all about the shooting, but he was afraid. I had no further talk with Conyers, because I saw that I was being suspected by the Negroes around Monroe, Georgia. William Lawson. End quote. Witnesses: H.J. Brown, George W. Mattert, District of Columbia, SS. Subscribed and sworn to before me a notary public in and for the district aforesaid, this 16th day of October, A.D. 1908. Seal: George W. Mattert, Notary Public. This day personally appeared before me Herbert J. Brown of Washington, D.C., who, being duly sworn in, deposes and says, quote, "I was employed by the War Department in May 1908, in company with Captain William G. Baldwin, of Roanoke, Virginia, Chief of the Baldwin Detective Agency, to investigate the conduct of the Battalion of the 25th Infantry, stationed at Brownsville, Texas, which conduct resulted in the Brownsville Raid, so called, on the night of August 13th through 14th, 1906, wherein one Frank Natus was killed, Lieutenant of Police Dominguez badly wounded, and the houses of several citizens were shot into. Captain Baldwin has charge of the secret work for the Norfolk and Western Railway, the Chesapeake and Ohio Railway, the Southern Railway, and the Atlantic Coast Line, and is one of the best known and most responsible detectives in the country. In conjunction with him, I have been continually employed upon this work since its inception in May. The facts set forth in my report, addressed to General George B. Davis, Judge Advocate General, War Department, under date of December 5th, 1908, are true to the best of my knowledge and belief. In particular, I visited Monroe, Georgia, to corroborate the investigation at that point of William Lawson, a colored detective in the employ of Captain Baldwin, whose affidavit and reports are annexed and to be made part of my report of December 5th, 1908, above referred to. I have several interviews at Monroe with Boyd Conyers, ex-private of Company B, 25th Infantry, one of the guard on the night of the Brownsville Raid, and found that William Lawson's statement regarding Conyers were substantially and essentially correct. I personally obtained from Conyers further information detailing how the cartridges used in the raid were surreptitiously and illegally obtained and distributed, how the principal raiders proceeded, when and by whom the gun racks in Company B were unlawfully and secretly opened for the purpose of the raid, how the raiders were protected during the subsequent to the raid and given opportunity to clean their guns, and, in particular, was furnished by Conyers with the names of 8 participants in the raid other than the 3 named by him in his statements to William Lawson. A total of 11, including himself, the said Conyers, all members of Company B, 25th Infantry. The leaders of the raid, as named by Boyd Conyers, were John Holloman, John Brown, Caroline de Saussure, and himself. Following them were William Anderson, James Bailey, Charles E. Cooper, William Lemons, Henry Jimerson, James Rastus Johnson, and Henry Sonny Jones. Sergeant Reed, in charge of the guard, was accused by Conyers of knowledge before and after the raid. Sergeant George Jackson, in charge of the keys to the gun racks of Company B, was accused of opening the racks for the raiders, and of again opening them subsequent to the raid in order that the guns might be removed and cleaned. I found Boyd Conyers in a disturbed frame of mind. No claim is made that his original declarations to William Lawson's were other than that of a criminal boasting to one of his own race of his crime and his success in escaping discovery. His subsequent declarations to me were given partly during moments of contrition and in a desire to unload his conscience by a confession, and partially as the result of careful and persistent questioning. I found the effect of the letter from Sergeant Foraker to Conyers extremely obstructive. He seemed to regard it as a mandate to adhere to the false story told by him before the Senate Committee on Military Affairs, and as absolving him of any and all obligations to aid in uncovering the truth. Similar influences were encountered at many points, adding largely to the difficulty of obtaining admissions of even the most obvious facts relative to the raid." End quote. Subscribed and sworn to before me on this 9th day of December, 1908. Seal, J.B. Randolph, Notary Public. End of section 47. Read by Gray Pickett, March 31st, 2022.